there's a really interesting debate brewing in Paleolithic archaeology. I'm sure you're all aware that our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals. Folks like this. It's in your DNA results, it's widely reported in the news. It's probably the fact most people know about human evolution and Paleolithic. But what you might not know is that the estimated date for this Paleolithic lovemaking is getting younger and younger. But at the same time, archaeological evidence for Homo sapiens outside of Africa is seemingly getting older and older and older. The reason why this is important and why it's generating this debate is because they're both intimately connected to this event called Out of Africa, one of the most significant moments in the evolution of modern humans. So let's dive into this debate. When did modern Homo sapiens leave Africa? When did we have a dalliance with our Neanderthal cousins? And what does any of that have to do with this extremely ancient pig? Just need to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, KiwiCo. KiwiCo's mission is to get your kids curious about the world around them, and I'm very proud to be sponsored by them. I think they rock. My kids absolutely love being a part of these KiwiCo clubs. The clubs are their program, which arrives every month. My kids have just done this really cool butterfly and caterpillar one, just in time for spring. And the color experiment one is literally one of their favorite toys. They love mixing up those colors. They'll do it for hours. You can tell that the things they're learning and playing with, it really sinks in, and they use it in other contexts. You know, we'll be talking about butterflies and caterpillars as we're going around the garden, talking about cocoons. They'll be wrapping themselves in blankets, talking about their cocoons. My kids are young, but if you're also a little bit older, check out KiwiCo Labs. Every month, you'll have this fantastic science experiment that you can do with your kids. And I just can't stress enough how much I enjoy seeing my kids be curious about the world around them. I don't know what they'll want to be when they grow up, but I feel like as long as I encourage them to be curious, then really my job is done. That's just the number one thing I want to instill in them, be curious about the world around them. If that's important to you too, and you want to check it out, go to kiwico.com/Stefan. You will get 50% off your first month. Thank you so much to KiwiCo for continuing to support the channel and make cool stuff. Let's talk about Neanderthal DNA. This whole debate about the timing of Neanderthal love and its impact on archaeology was really brought into focus by two recent papers. Neanderthal Ancestry Through Time, Insights from Genomes of Ancient and Present-Day Humans by Leonardo Yassi et al. And Earliest Modern Human Genomes, Constrained Timing of Neanderthal Admixture by Arev et al. Fortunately for me, I was able to chat to both of them about this. So hopefully this all turns out well. All right, I think we have to start this with a little bit of obligatory nuance. I think there is some confusion about what geneticists mean when they say out of Africa. Hominins, upright walking apes, likely, very, very likely evolved in Africa, because it's where our two closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, live, and it's where all the oldest fossils live, like this one here, Mrs. Ples, an Australopithecus. Every fossil older than 2 million years old has been found in Africa. However, from around 2 million years ago, it seems that a hominin, likely an early form of Homo erectus, left Africa. We have some really important sites like Dmanisi in Georgia, but also really far away in Asia, in China, in Java. A Homo erectus-like hominin from 2 million years ago was living across Africa and Europe and Asia. No doubt in the course of 2 million years of evolution, there were many more migrations out of Africa. And there were also probably migrations back into Africa. You know, there's no hard geographical barrier here. In 2 million years, there's going to be a lot of movement. But all of that is not really what geneticists mean when they say out of Africa.
Yes, so there's actually multiple out of Africa, but what people usually refer to is like the movement of our ancestors, like that actually contributed the ancestry to present-day individuals. These movement roughly 60,000 years ago, that we call out of Africa. Like, at least that is what we call out of Africa.
There are many lines of genetic evidence that support this. This isn't really the video about that evidence. The simplest one to explain right now is that Africa is home to the greatest genetic diversity.
So it's already sort of known since 1987, where Mark Stonking, who used to be a group leader here, and some colleagues published a paper on mitochondrial genomes. And they saw that on the Y chromosome, we see the same thing, that all the diversity that is outside of Africa is actually maintained within Africa. So populations in Africa have all the diversity that we see in these uniparental markers that are outside of Africa, which indicates the origin of this other populations outside of Africa lies within Africa. Also, when we look at the nuclear genomes, we see the same thing. So as we go away from the Africa continent, sequencing genomes of all the people living around, we see that as we go further away, the diversity decreases.
All of this is extremely strong evidence that our ancestors evolved in Africa, or you could say probably from like the past 400,000 or 500,000 years. Almost certainly they were in Africa. Then, of course, at some point, some of them left. And what's really interesting thing that ancient genetics has revealed, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it seems that our ancestors left in the same migration. Is it fair to say that even if you are an Aboriginal Australian or someone that lives, like a Sami person in the far north of Europe, you both descend from this migration out of Africa significantly?
Yes.
And your Neanderthal ancestry comes from there. This is what we know, that you, like the Sami, the small parts of your Neanderthal DNA in you, if you're a Sami or an Aboriginal Australian, you do share definitely, or this is what we think, you do share this ancestry from an event that took place around 47,000 years ago.
This is what you find in your paper, right? You see that everybody's Neanderthal ancestry is correlating, which means that they must have share a common ancestor that was in this group that interbred with the same group of Neanderthals.
Right? It's not that, let's say, one group left, met Neanderthals, went to Europe, and then, independent from that, a group left, met Neanderthals, went to Oceania. No, it was like probably that what we think. It's like one group left and kind of are still in one population where they met Neanderthals, and then they diversify. And that gives us a hint about what happened in the Out of Africa event, right? Must have been one group.
So because all of our ancestors left in the same migration, and it seems we all picked up Neanderthal DNA from this one period of love making, in a sense, the timing of this Neanderthal input puts a ceiling on Out of Africa, because it must have happened when the group was small enough and close enough for these genes to be widely distributed. Which is why it's so interesting that Leonardo said it happened roughly 47,000 years ago. Let's dig into that. That's really important. So let's start with Arev's paper. Hers was really, really interesting because Arev and the team actually sequenced the oldest modern human DNA ever sequenced so far. The first specimen came from a place called Zlatý Kůň, which means golden horse, and that's in Czechia. It's this ridge of yellow rock, seems to be. There, in the 1950s, the remains of a woman were found, but because she was found so long ago, didn't have knowledge and techniques we have now, that kind of create a problem for geneticists and archaeologists.
So in Zlatý Kůň, it's a great cave system, but there is only one individual. Skeletal elements that are related to only one individual were discovered without any archaeological context. And it was not possible to radiocarbon date the remains from this individual, because they were treated with animal glue back in the days in order to preserve the skeletal elements. However, the problem with that is that it brings contamination, collagen contamination, and then all the radiocarbon dates you would maintain from this specimen will be shifted to younger dates because of this extra contamination of glue, collagen contamination. So it was not possible to get a date from this individual, but genetics showed that this individual must be older than 45,000 years.
Any Homo sapien remains in Europe older than 45,000 years, or around 45,000 years, are going to be extremely important, because all the evidence suggests that's when, modern humans arrived and never left. Arev was able to get the highest coverage genome so far from this Zlatý Kůň woman. We were able to see it in the highest resolution yet. The other samples in Arev's study came from a site called Ranis in Germany, and this place looks incredible. It's like a little bit like a fairy tale. Basically, these human remains were recovered underneath this cliff. I think I'm right in thinking, as long as I've got my information correct and all of this, that this cliff is now also where this medieval castle is. What a fantastic place to excavate. Okay, that looks so picturesque. I'd love to visit one day. How brilliant. I love it. So European. That's exactly what Americans think we're up to all the time, okay? Digging up bones under castles. But it's great. I love it. 13 specimens were sampled, and it turns out these belonged to 6 individuals
that were excavated in Ranis. And the one specimen that we were able to get a high coverage genome from is we call Ranis 13. And this was the best preserved Ice Age remain that we so far found from a modern human. The DNA preservation was really, really good, around 40%, which is like almost unheard of, except from Denisova Cave for this time interval. So we were actually very lucky in that sense.
So by 40%, you mean you're able to get 40% of their genome?
No, actually, it means that from the DNA extraction, the DNA extract we got, it was 40% of that was the genome from this individual.
Okay.
Because we had many other things, right? Microbial DNA, contaminant DNA, and all the other things from that are sequenced also with the DNA of the individual. When I meant that we obtained a high coverage genome, it means that each position on the genome of this person was sequenced multiple times. So we cover most of the genome, and we cover this part like in 30 copies. You know, if we call, for example, a genome is 30x, that means that each position on the genome on average was covered by 30 reads. So we have a pretty good idea which base is at that position.
All of the samples from Zlati Kun and Ranis date to around 45,000 years ago. It's impossible to say which of the two is older because sort of the date estimates overlap. So it's likely they lived within a couple of hundred years of each other. And in fact, for 2 of the specimens, this simply must have been the case.
So what we found was that 2 individuals from Ranis were either 5th or 6th degree related to the individual we find in Zlati Kun, and this 5 or 6 degree relatedness means they were either distant cousins or maybe grandmother or grandchild or something like this. So it's really family if you think of it. So this was actually for me very surprising because, you know, it's very difficult to find human remains that are so old, yet alone having DNA from those specimens, right? Usually we don't get anything. And we were, you know, so lucky to get this. And what is the chance of finding individuals that are actually like family, genetically speaking, family with each other in these 2 sites? It was really surprising to me.
There was also a mother and daughter pair found at Ranis, which is very nice. Tugs at the heartstrings. Yeah, very cool. It's always nice to find a family connection. It appeals to something within us, I think, within me, certainly. It's always nice to see a family. Always makes me feel a little bit soppy, but you never know. Maybe they all hated each other and didn't get on, so you never know. But
at least they died together, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's kind of a sad thought. Maybe they all died together now.
Maybe you
what
just cut
happened to them?
this out from the show.
Yeah. However these families died, bit of a bummer of a thought. It seems that their ancestors interbred with Neanderthals between 45 and 49,000 years ago. So roughly 47,000 years ago. This was the same conclusion that Leonardo's paper came to, but he had a totally different study, totally different methodology.
So if you remember maybe high school biology, there's a thing called meiosis, where the parental chromosomes get shuffled during the process of producing sperm and eggs. So we call this process recombination, and this is going to be really important. And so now, when we had this admixture event, we had a Neanderthal, we had a modern humans, and they made an offspring. And this offspring will always have one set of chromosomes being from a modern human, and the other set of the chromosomes being from a Neanderthal. So what happens next is that during the meiosis of these individuals, the 2 chromosomes will exchange parts. So the Neanderthal actually will break down, right? It will get kind of shuffled with the modern human one. And over time, the shuffling occurs over and over and over again. And the Neanderthal segments, once being a full chromosome, will get shorter, and shorter. And this is why we have these small segments when we look on present-day individuals. And this is also how we can date everything that we did.
I hope this is a good analogy. Leonardo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of imagine it to like cutting a pizza, right? You could continue cutting and cutting a pizza. The slices are going to get smaller and smaller. The amount of pizza isn't going to change. That's probably happening in our genes all the time, right? This Neanderthal DNA is getting chopped up, but we're not sleeping with any more Neanderthals, so the amount doesn't vary. Obviously, we can lose Neanderthal genes if they're being selected against, and that almost certainly has happened. But it seems like it's pretty closely fixed at about 2% of everyone's genome at the minute. After 40+ thousand years within us, these chunks of DNA are so small.
And fortunately, we can go back in time, right? Because of ancient DNA. We can sample basically, okay, how did the Neanderthal ancestry look like 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago? Or even like in Arev's case, like 43 point whatever thousand years ago. So extremely close to when Neanderthals and modern humans actually met.
Leonardo's study had a diverse set of modern genomes, people from all over the world, different places, plus 59 ancient genomes. And that kind of allows us to rewind the clock. Using all of these, looking at all of these, Leonardo and the team, they can kind of get a sense about when this Neanderthal lovemaking occurred.
So like the center of this, or the peak of interbreeding, was at 47,000 years, but it had this duration, right? Mm-hmm. So it started maybe at 51,000 years ago and went on to almost 40,000 years ago.
So we have two different data sets, two different studies coming to the same conclusion about Neanderthal lovemaking, that it happened roughly about 47,000 years ago, but certainly by around 50,000 years ago, 51,000 years ago. What does any of that have to do with that pig? Let's get to that pig. This pig was found at a site called Liang Karampuang on the southern tip of Sulawesi, an island in Indonesia. My apologies if I said the name wrong. Seems like an absolutely lovely tropical island, home to 20 million people, some incredible wildlife. Karampuang Cave seems to sit in this really spectacular rock outcrop, and estimating from the diagrams in the paper here, but perhaps about 35 meters from the cave entrance, across seemingly quite jagged rocks, humans, a very, very long time ago, painted these incredible scenes. The people behind the study interpret this as a pig and perhaps 3 humans around it. I think that's a good interpretation. Certainly looks like a pig to me. All the wiry fur, wiry bristles. It just might be the oldest piece of narrative artwork ever found. There are other pieces of artwork found, and maybe they had a story to them, but not obviously, right? It's not obvious that they did. But here, 3 people around this huge pig, there's probably a story behind it. This might be the oldest evidence of like storytelling we have. It's really special, very, very cool. Scientists were able to date this artwork by dating the calcium that builds up on top of it from like the water dripping in this cave. And so you can deduce a point in time where this painting must have been made at, right? Because it's underneath this calcium buildup that is this specific age. And according to those results, this artwork was made at least 51,200 years ago. Very, very long time ago. And not only is it a long time ago, but it's kind of getting close to that upper limit of this Neanderthal inbreeding. If this artwork was in the Middle East, in Iraq, Syria, somewhere like that, wouldn't be a problem, right? This is the region where humans are living, they're interacting with Neanderthals. 51,000 years, perfect. That's bang on time. But all the way in Sulawesi, thousands of miles from there, thousands of kilometers. Could our ancestors really have gotten there so quickly? This isn't the only archaeological site from this region which is really getting kind of old. There was another one called Tampa Ling in what is Laos, found these really fragmentary human remains. Now, based on the measurements of them, they are tentatively assigned to Homo sapiens. They don't seem to have these, thick, brow ridges, for example, of other archaic human groups like Neanderthals and presumably Denisovans. They date to between 68 and 86,000 years ago. Down in Australia, a site called Majed Bebe dated at the minute between 65 and 53,000 years ago. And in China, they have several sites that they claim to have been home to modern humans, Homo sapiens, older than 70,000 years ago. All of these predate that episode of Neanderthal lovemaking, and therefore out of Africa. I really wanted to ask Arev and Leonardo, how do they reconcile this conflicting data? The first way these dates could be reconciled, the genetic data and the archaeological data could be reconciled, is that we've made a mistake somewhere. And in a certain sense, that could be true, right? Because we don't know everything about our DNA. We certainly have not found every archaeological site. We haven't even found 1% of 1% of all the archaeological sites. So all of these data points could be resolved by further research that has corrected some oversight that we have unknowingly made. All of that is possible. But it is interesting that Leonardo and Arev's study, using different data, still came to the same conclusion. And in fact, the genetic data has kind of been pointing towards this younger date for quite a while now.
So I think they estimated it 41 to 55,000 years ago is one of these estimates. And our estimates are in this interval.
I was not really surprised. Like you said, it was already suggested that these dates are possible. So it's not really out of the range of anything that was suggested before. So it was cool because, we can get really precise date compared to the previous estimates.
So if the dates from this DNA are true, that this is when the Neanderthal love went down, then how else can we reconcile it? It could be possible that the sites that we have assigned to Homo sapiens were not made by Homo sapiens. Perhaps the pig at Sulawesi was produced by a Denisovan. It could be possible. We have to keep our minds open to that possibility. Currently, though, all the really accurate, realistic artwork of prehistoric life is assigned to Homo sapiens. All the other tentative signs of artwork and symbolism that are believed to have been produced by Neanderthals, they're just a little bit more abstract. It seems they never depicted real life so accurately like we tend to do. Who knows why? Still, we have to keep our minds open to the possibility we are looking at the art of a completely different branch of humanity, or that the bones at Tampaling are not modern humans, but Denisovans, something like that, another population of humans. Entirely possible. But if the pig was drawn by modern humans, and it predates out of Africa, or at least predates the out of Africa that we descend from, then it must have been made by another group of Homo sapiens, another out of Africa that we didn't know about.
So it could be that there were other smaller out of Africa events before this main one that met with Neanderthals.
Whether this earlier out of Africa migration were our ancestors is a very tricky thing to say. Certainly it seems on the whole, no. But there's always a possibility that they contributed DNA in a very slight way, very, very slight way.
That's more correct to say. I would also say it didn't contribute anything major, right? Because there could be slight contributions from these populations, but we cannot really detect it so well, and we cannot date it so well. So
the other possibility is that the humans that made this artwork didn't contribute to our ancestry in any meaningful sense because they died out. They went extinct. They went locally extinct. Sometimes it's hard to think about humans kind of going extinct a little bit, right? Because in our time, it's so easy to view our globe-spanning success and technological development as almost predetermined, guaranteed. Of course, that's what we were going to do. But the Paleolithic world, it really was a different world. It was a hard world. Humans at that time lived in very, very small groups. And actually, thanks to Arev's paper, we can get an insight into how large these communities were.
Yeah, we do. So using the genetic information, we can also estimate what we call effective population size. So it's how many individuals in each generation were producing offspring. And this was for the Ranis Latikun population. It was about 200, at most 300 individuals.
Now, effective population size only counts breeding individuals. So there were certainly children and older people in this community that are not counted in these genetic estimates. But it's entirely possible at the time that the people of Ranis were living, maybe there was 1,000 people across Europe. It's so hard to imagine how empty of humans their world was. Like now, living in a city with 1 million people, it seems so hard to believe, so hard to picture. But that is the world that they lived in. You can easily imagine in a world where the human population is so small that the deaths of a few key people or a couple of bad years in a row could wipe out whole communities, whole human lineages. And we can kind of see that happening in Arev's paper. I really wanted to ask her if any modern people descend from that population at Ranis. It's so much nuance even saying like we descend from them, but we descend from the same out of Africa event. But
Yes.
Do we descend from this population as well, or is that impossible to say?
We don't find any evidence for that. So all the groups that live today and also the ancient genomes, they seem to be equally distant from this group, which indicates that there was no gene flow into any of those, or they did not leave any ancestry in any of those groups, which is what we call also like a dead end or extinct group. We don't detect any ancestry from these individuals in any later human remain. I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but it seems that they died out. Yeah.
Mm. Well, maybe not unfortunate for us, but certainly for them, probably.
Yeah, definitely.
And they don't, yeah. They don't. No one alive today seemingly descends from that population at Ranis. At some point, they all died. Probably, very, very likely that this happened to many human groups.
The human history is not necessarily a history of success. There were probably more branches that split and died out than the one that led to us and colonized, outside of Africa. So it's likely the norm that these populations got extinct and did not survive.
In the twists and turns of that huge, long Paleolithic history, life was not guaranteed. It's so interesting because our success seems so predetermined, and our success at the expense of Neanderthals, you can't help but think as like some innate ability we had compared to them and blah, 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 blah. But it could be chance, man. It could be chance, like just enough rolls of the dice and we're 6. I don't know where I'm going with this metaphor, but our ancestors survived. They were just the lucky roll of the dice. The people who drew the pig at Ranis, their descendants died out, a dead end. Yeah, kind of sobering to think about.